It's Wednesday at 5 p.m. Eastern, so you know what that means. It's time for another episode of #EventIcons, presented by Endless Events, the show where you get to ask the icons of the events industry anything. Use the question panel on the webinar to submit your questions, or you can hop on Twitter. Submit your questions with #EventIcons. We'll be answering your questions live during the entire show. Before we get started, the more people we have watching, the better conversation we can have. So please help share #EventIcons on Twitter and Facebook. Just tell your friends to watch at www.event-icons.com. Now, without any further delay, this is #EventIcons.
All right. Hello, everybody, and welcome to another edition of Event Icons, the place where the icons of the event industry come together. I'm Brandt Krueger from Event Technology Consulting. Joining me today as co-host, co-pilot, amazing person in general is international woman of mystery and intrigue, Tahira Endean. Hey, Tahira, how are you doing today?
Awesome, Brandt. How are you doing today?
I'm doing fantastic because we get to talk today. This is episode 105, and we're talking about virtual reality. So bring on the tech, folks. We are being joined today by a special guest, Jonah Brotman. Jonah is a serial entrepreneur who created a backpacking with a purpose travel organization, pitched for $1 million from former President Clinton, and is currently an evangelist for the future at House of VR, Toronto's premier VR lounge and event space. Did I get all of that right there, Jonah?
Sounds about good. Yeah, thanks for the introduction.
Fantastic. Well, thanks for joining us. I'm really excited to be talking to you today about virtual reality and some of the options that are out there. So let's get straight into it.
All right. I get to start today. So, Jonah, what got you in? You're kind of almost just dipping your toes into the events industry. So what's led you to this place of dipping your toes into this space?
Yeah, so I would say, like probably many people who come to the event space, that it was a sort of roundabout, circuitous sort of way. When we started House of VR, the vision was pretty simple. We wanted to create a sort of platform, a central hub that could serve as an ecosystem builder for VR and AR and kind of immersive media. So to us, that was really important, that we could create a space like that in Toronto. At the same time, what we realized very quickly was that there was a huge interest in kind of large group and large scale events in our space. We have 2 floors, 4,200 square feet, really beautifully designed. And I think that what happened was a lot of people came in and said, wow, this is really accessible. This is really a fun place to be. I can do everything from a kid's birthday party to a huge corporate cocktail gala. And we've had all kind of different things like that, lots of brand activations and things. So events came pretty naturally to us. And at this point, we actually are, I would say, doing kind of more events than our day-to-day arcade model.
Absolutely. Here's just kind of a fun fact, actually. This is that there's a few companies that I've worked with who are nightclub companies primarily, but they find that square footage you just mentioned, 4,200 square feet, is almost exactly the perfect size to have for a venue where you're going to gather people on a regular basis.
Great. If I would have known that before we said yes to the lease, it would have made me sign it faster. No, it's interesting because our capacity is 275, and most events, it's funny, like our legal capacity is 275, but I would say usually good events are between 150 and kind of 215, 220. And you're right, it's a good number. At the same time, we often do events that are kind of speaker series. We do a VR empathy talk night every month that probably is around 50 people, but it's nice. It's more intimate, kind of, that smaller scale feel, seated. So seated versus standing is obviously a huge difference in terms of event capacity and space, but that's good to know that that's the right number.
Exactly. You did well. Now, you came from having a backpacking company, so that's quite a transition. So if you weren't in the events industry, what do you think what might have been a different shift?
Good question. I would say I'm in the category of kind of serial entrepreneur. I think that in late 2016, I had an idea that infested my brain and I couldn't get it out. I think that happens to a lot of entrepreneurs, that something just hits and, you go about your daily life, but every once in a while it just kind of comes back and comes back and comes back. And the idea was essentially that VR was really cool and that not enough people had tried it. Myself, I had barely tried it, to be honest. So it's interesting. Some people say like, oh, have you been in the industry for years? And I say, definitely not. But what I found was that VR events were really interesting. So I went to one at TIFF at the Toronto International Film Fest. That was probably 100-person lineup. Everyone was paying $30 for tickets, so there was huge interest, but there was only about 9 experiences in there. They filtered people in every half an hour, so you kind of only could have 1 or 2 VR experiences in there, and I felt like this was not the appropriate way to have people experience it, and as an event, I thought it failed, but as a technology, I thought it succeeded. So my idea was, how do we take this really cool technology and cater events that allow a very diverse group of people to try it, whether it's, again, corporate team building stuff or a speaker panel about VR empathy. We do a Freaky Friday horror nights that, brings out people who are into horror. I'm mostly scared of it, but lots of people love it. So yeah, I think that we really want to be kind of that open platform, that kind of accessible place for a lot of people to enjoy.
So I have to say that what you just said about, I'm trying to imagine, I don't like horror films even when I'm not immersed in them, so I can't imagine. But good for people that, that want to do that. So
yeah, legit scary, I would say. Very legitimate. No
kidding.
Scary.
So let's start with just the very basics for anybody who maybe, I'm going to go out on a limb and say most people are familiar with it, but just in, the event that, people are not. Let's start with the basics. So what is virtual reality?
Great. So I think the best way to understand virtual reality and augmented reality is another kind of part of it that a lot of people talk about, is that virtual reality is where you put on a headset or some sort of device and you're transported to a different reality. So, it can be flying through the stars, it can be underwater, lots of different things, but it's that full immersion where you are kind of not present in the current world. Augmented reality is interesting because sometimes it involves a screen, but often it doesn't. And what it does is it kind of superimposes a digital layer onto the real world. So there's a lot of examples where people have shown, we were talking about it just before, an AR tape measure. So you could basically hold up your phone, see this wall and say like, okay, the wall is 9 feet, 10 inches. So really, really cool, but different because it's just superimposed over the real world. Whereas virtual reality, you're kind of taken away from the real world by being in this headset.
So, and that kind of leads into our next, which was, how the difference is. And then, of course, there's this, idea of mixed reality that's also talked about in the industry. So are you, how are you seeing those 3 things kind of?
Yeah, people like acronyms. So I've heard ones as ranging as, so there's VR, there's AR, there's MR, which is mixed reality. And mixed reality is sort of a hybrid of both. So often the way it's shown in our space, we have green screen booths. So basically the person in the VR headset is experiencing it just like they would normally. But with the green screen, what's really cool is that on the TV or on whatever the projecting image is, people on the outside are seeing that person in like a third person perspective in the actual game. So it looks like they have a sword or shield in their hands or a paintbrush. And it's really awesome. That's also, why we really feel that VR is a kind of group kind of team building experience, because, when someone's superimposed into a game and is a soccer goalie and they're making a save like that, it looks really cool and it's really fun and very interactive for those who are both playing and watching. So we really like that.
So, Jonah, you mentioned the group experience, and one of the things that I've run into as I've been speaking to folks about technology and events is there seems to be sometimes kind of a resistance to VR because they see it as this kind of solo experience that, oh, well, who would want to, put a bunch of people in headsets? Event people we're people. And so as a result, sometimes you do see a little bit of resistance when it comes to, this idea of putting on a headset and going into a virtual world. Can you expand a little bit about how maybe using it as a group experience might work and how it can actually be that kind of group experience that we're kind of more used to?
Yeah, I think one of the challenges for the event industry in terms of VR is that for the past few years, in many ways, VR has been a nice add-on to conferences or different types of events. But it's always because it's always a sort of free experience. I think people don't value it as much. And one of the things we struggle with as a VR space is to actually get people to come in and pay for an experience. And the reason is because because people have been giving it away for free for so long. And I think that does devalue it in some way. At the same time, then you see, huge activations like at South by Southwest that Ready Player One is doing, and some really cool experiences. People just assume that all can be free, but somebody's got to pay to create this amazing, amazing experience. So I think that's one of the challenges. The other one that is interesting to me in terms of the group kind of cohesion, group dynamic of it is where we're getting to in terms of free roam and multiplayer VR experiences. And that to me is really, really exciting. So you've got the ability now to have people be untethered and to be in a multiplayer experience where they're shooting bad guys or whatever it is all together. They see each other's avatars. They know where each other's bodies actually are. It's very, very cool. And to me, that's the goal of what we're trying to get to as kind of VR events, that people go in together, they enjoy it together, they have that collaborative or competitive, depending on how you want to do it, experience. So The Void and Zero Latency and some of those experiences have done a cool job of it. But those are kind of standalone pieces. What we really want to see the industry get to is being able to offer that at events, at conferences, at workshops, at different types of experiences, because I think that's what people are really looking for.
You touched on something that I think is an important thing. This balance between how much things cost and giving away the experience for free. Because I'll be honest with you, I've seen some VR experiences in the mall or whatever, and you're like, I wouldn't want to do that because I can always wind up doing it at an event sometime. I've literally had that conversation in my head. But what are some of the other elements? So in addition, obviously we've got the hardware, the physical goggles and headphones potentially that we've got to put on. In addition to the physical hardware, what else goes into creating these VR experiences, behind the scenes that again is adding to that cost and that value along the way?
Yeah, so the number one real expense right now is development cost. So, you've got full production houses who are working on a single piece, a 7 to 10 minute piece that's really beautiful, expertly designed. There was a VR film that won the first Oscar this last year for animated short, which is, really awesome for the industry. But the production of it was like $15 million just for a single VR piece. It's unreasonable to think that they can kind of recoup that cost in any amount of time. And they were mostly doing it as a showcase so that they could get more contracts with, big corporates and things like that. So the production time and cost is definitely a huge one. I think the hardware costs are there. It depends on what you're kind of doing. The free roam hardware costs are a lot because you have to have a backpack that is basically a computer plus the VR system and all that. And then finally, I think that in terms of, how we run our space is always about staffing. Staffing in the sense that you can't just put a piece of VR equipment out and assume people will know how to use it. The stat we heard was that 90% of people have not tried VR. I think the number is actually lower now. I think that's a bit of an older stat, but let's just say it's probably not lower than 75%. It's still lots of people come into our space all the time and have never tried VR before. So, you have to educate them how to put the headset on, how to hold the controllers, and then also more than that, how to actually experience it. I think that, again, the goal of VR is total immersion, that you don't know the difference between what is real life and what is kind of in the headset. And to have that, people need to be comfortable enough where they can't tell if they're walking or they're pressing a button to walk. You know what I mean? And that's a challenge. That's a challenge to create content like that. It's a challenge to educate people to be comfortable with that. But I would say in the best experiences I've done, it's true. There's been at least a few experiences where you're in there for 10 or 15 minutes, and by the end of it, you come out and are kind of blown away. You're kind of, you actually feel like you were absolutely in a different reality, and now you're kind of grounding yourself back in this reality. So that's the goal.
So, Jonah, we had a question come in from the audience, and just a reminder for folks that are tuning in live, be sure to connect with us either on Facebook. You can use Facebook Live and ask us a question there, and they'll feed it to us. Or if you're joining us through the Zoom app, you can use the Q&A button there to access the Q&A box and send us a question there. Patty Shock asks us, what about people with corrective lenses? Is the experience diminished when not wearing glasses? And I think I know the answer to this, but I would love to hear your response.
Sure. What we say is that generally most glasses, it's really about the frame. So most frames actually do fit in the HTC Vive headsets. We use Vive exclusively. And I would say about 80% of people can actually fit them in. Some ones that are like really wide frames struggle, but usually what you do is you just put the frame into the headset and then the headset onto your head. The thing we kind of say in our waivers and tell people to do is if they can wear contacts, it's just a much smoother and easier experience. But most glasses still do fit. One final thing to note on that is we have worked on a project with Sunnybrook Hospital, which is kind of the largest kind of senior care center in the city. And they were looking at VR as a tool to help with kind of quality of life, end of life care. And they built these headsets that were basically an HTC Vive modified, and the lenses were corrective unto itself. I mean, they were the widest, biggest lenses I've ever seen, but I couldn't see anything in them because they were so, it probably was for people like -8 or -10 or below in terms of, the eye abilities. But apparently it worked really well for people who had very little vision. So I think more and more you'll see people trying to modify and customize to those who really need help with sight like that. So really cool, I think.
I think there's so much stuff that's happening with not only things that are like sight, but when you said like working with, elder care, getting to end of life issues, there's so much work that is being done in immersive spaces with, that I see in the work that we're doing with this conference that I plan, where it's, everything from working with mental health issues and, being able to go into a virtual environment and put in, there's one application that I saw where you can put in the words that worry you or words that frighten you, and you can basically take those words and throw them up into the space, and then you can make them small and diminish them, and you can take words that make you feel powerful and you can throw them into the space, and then you can grow them. Cool. So there's so many cool applications that are happening that are, there's so many entertainment and immersive things, but there's also so many other ways that we're using them as tools outside of the event space, which I think is, to me, it's just endlessly fascinating, the possibilities that we have for this. So, what are some other things that you're seeing that are helping humans really respond positively to these virtual experiences? I mean, you're seeing it every day, so.
Yeah, I totally agree with that sentiment. That experience sounds really cool. And we're kind of shown a lot of those things on a daily, weekly basis. So people sending us stuff. I just heard of one, I think it premiered at Tribeca last year, called Tree. And you start off as a seed. And it's actually a full immersive interactive experience where they have a sort of scent creating machine. So it smells like soil at the beginning and then branches and all that. You start off as a seed, you grow to be a small tree, a larger tree, trunks, branches, all that. And then I guess maybe to give you the spoiler, though you can see it on their website pretty easily, is that at the end, humans come and cut the whole forest down, and the whole thing's about, right? It's a little bit Bambi surprising, but apparently it's a really beautiful experience that, really kind of wakes you up as to issues that humans are causing with deforestation and climate change and that kind of stuff. And I think that to go back to your question, I think that what we're really trying to do is to push the conversation forward that VR is an amazing technology. It's not the ends, it's the means to the end. And the end is deeper understanding and deeper compassion and empathy and understanding of the other. And Chris Milk, one of the kind of founders of the new VR movement, said a little, maybe 2015, he kind of created the term of VR as the ultimate empathy machine. And, we've done this empathy series that's been really successful. We first started with Indigenous issues in Canada. Then we focused on refugees and migrants. We have one next week, which will be about climate change. And, how can you make people feel climate change? So there's some pieces, one's from Stanford, which is about showing how ocean acidification is a problem, something you've probably heard about but don't really understand how it works, where you actually go into the experience, you see how coral is getting bleached over time because of the kind of ocean becoming more acidic, and you can feel it. You look right around and then everything around you becomes more acidic. So I think that in terms of that, there's so much power as a technology to showcase to people what other people's lived experience is. And that's where we see huge value, and that's where we're going to continue to push to showcase at events. Another example of an event we did was with Oxfam. They had a great kind of, what you would probably say is a fairly standard kind of 5-minute piece that if you saw it on TV, you'd say, okay, this looks like the traditional Oxfam ad of, a small town in Eastern Kenya where people don't have water, and then Oxfam builds a well and then they have water, right? But there was something about being in VR when you just look around and you see, it felt like you were in Southern Kenya. You see how drought is vastly, drastically affecting these people. And then by the end, there's, you see the well being constructed, and then the happiness of people and kind of the real change. There's something about that feeling that just was different. And we showed it to probably about 150 people that night. And you could see the impact on them versus, I would say, a traditional kind of fundraising methodology. I thought it was really effective, and it was really powerful.
I'm curious, you've talked about some of the kind of the stock experiences that you've had in the VR lounge and what goes on there. You mentioned some of the additional experiences, making it more mixed reality, bringing it out of that. So I'm curious, about that. What are some of the other activities that kind of can happen there in the VR lounge? And then kind of the other half of that is what you were just talking about, is I'm curious to know how much of what you're doing is custom, so that as people want to come in for their events, how much lead time is involved in that, those kinds of things, where if they wanted to provide a custom experience in your location, what is kind of involved in that?
Yeah, so I would say that in terms of the custom experiences of the space side of things for events, we kind of are fully modular, can customize it as people are looking for. So for example, next Saturday night, we have a large kind of after conference event. So 200 plus people, kind of a cocktail, hanging out after a conference. There'll be VR available, but it'll be kind of dinner, drinks, dancing, all that kind of stuff. The next day, we'll be fully flipping the space into basically being a concert venue. So there's a group called So Far Sounds, which is kind of an international group who organizes secret shows in various locations. They only announce the location the day of, and I don't even think they announce the performers, but really cool kind of up and coming performers. So we'll be flipping it entirely into a kind of concert space. So in 24 hours, we can, really show the difference of what we're doing. In terms of customizing VR for those experiences, usually we have our standard library, which has a kind of Netflix style menu system that people can, in the headset, they can kind of trigger and select any of the games. For certain experiences, like maybe that one on the conference after party, we often we pre-select experiences that we think the group will enjoy, and we pre-select it, kind of curate that content for them, so that, maybe there's more kind of action shooter games. If it's a competitive group of people, maybe it's more artistic narrative content. If it's, different kind of organization. So that's kind of what we do. In terms of building custom VR experiences just for a single event, again, it comes down to that cost being really high. I mean, sometimes people say stuff like that. Oh, we did an event with, it was a Winter Olympics, basically, offsite event. So we went to the client. It was sort of KPMG, Deloitte, in a big office building. And they said, oh, can you make us a Winter Olympics VR experience? And we said, no, we can't do that in 3 weeks. Like, that's kind of ridiculous. And we said, but we can find you a list of pretty cool stuff that we'll check out. So, we scoured everywhere to try and find, and we found about 10, and they picked 3 or 4, and we went with those ones. So, I think that it's still challenging to make custom VR experiences for a client. The budgets are just high right now still, but those will come down over time, and I think they have been. But yeah, I think in terms of our space and the way we run events, it's very customizable, very modular, and we really try and work. I think, as anyone in the event industry kind of understands, you really try and work on making the event feel memorable and unique just for that group, and it's not just a kind of a boring kind of stock event space.
So now we've said dinner, drinks, cocktails, after parties. So of course, one of the things that, we hear about VR experiences is that, there's a sense of nausea, a sense of, discomfort that goes along with those. So what are some things that, you're seeing that, how often statistically, I guess, would you see that happening? And what are some things you can do to counteract that so that that's not happening for people?
Yeah, so I think the first thing is to curate content that isn't roller coasters and isn't very kind of nausea-inducing. It's funny, I actually just got an email from someone today saying like, hey, do you have roller coaster type of VR? That's all I want to do. And I basically responded and said, no, we don't, because it causes nausea and vertigo for people. So our content manager, our team is really focused on providing stuff that is really accessible to everyone that won't really cause you vertigo. That naturally happens at times to different people. I would say, it's a good question, what percentage of people? I would say not more than maybe 15% ever really have it. Again, I think we curate our content to be heavily away from that. I know of places where it's really challenging, like most of the experiences cause it. So we really try and focus on that. And then the other one is, I was at a place where it was at I think a Samsung Experience Center. It was sort of like a big chair that they strapped you in and lifted you 5 feet off the ground and then kind of spun the whole thing around like crazy. And I didn't actually do it because I looked at it and said, like, that's just going to make me barf. Like, I don't know why anybody would do that. And yeah, I mean, it's interesting because I think they take the idea that VR should be totally immersive, that you should take people out of their reality, and that to do so, you have to really like jolt them and shock them. And while some people might want that, I don't actually think the vast majority of people want that. And I think it will cause kind of nausea and vertigo. So I don't know, maybe they're right and I'm wrong, but it sure feels like people don't want that. So we really try and steer clear of that.
I think what's interesting is, so, there's like the physical discomfort, but I think some of the things that you talked about already, the things like the Oxfam experiences, those kinds of things. I think there's a few things that we do with events. And one of the things, there's a few areas where I think that we're kind of scared as event planners to take some risks. And so we always think, well, every event has to have nice moments. Everything has to be good and happy. And I think that what we lose in that is the opportunity for those deeper, more emotional connections that people have to an event. And I think it's really interesting when you talk about, bringing in those experiences where people are going to have they're going to have an emotional reaction to a drought in Kenya. They're going to have an emotional reaction to a number of issues that you can address really strongly in VR because you are immersed in them. And so I think it's interesting talking about how we're seeing some of those being used. And I loved some of your examples that you gave earlier. And I think those are, and correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems to me those are also some of the areas where we will see people investing in VR because of that emotional reaction. When you can use the medium of film to create something that makes people, fundamentally, it makes them want to be more involved in that cause, whether that's financially or by being able to actually go and physically do something to support that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think for us, again, we are very much of that mindset. And I think that is, to me, where the future of this is going. I think the entertainment side of things is easy. It's easy to make entertainment and video games. It's the first vertical of VR that's been successful. The next one that a lot of people are saying will happen eventually is social VR. So Facebook is pretty aggressively betting on that everyone will want to kind of hang out in these VR chat rooms. I'm still hesitant to see whether that will happen or not. I think that at some point we will do that, but I don't think it's actually that close. I think much sooner is that filmmakers and, Catherine Bigelow, who did, Hurt Locker and lots of other big films, she did one called The Rangers or The Poachers. It's basically about rangers in Central Africa kind of defending guerrillas against poachers. Really good experience, really. Again, it puts you right there. You're on a truck bouncing around with these guys and you understand that this is a hugely important thing to protect these kind of endangered animals. And that's where I think the power is. In 5 minutes, you can actually learn about something and then, begin caring about it, whereas you likely never would have otherwise. So to me, that's where VR's power comes from.
Absolutely. Brandt.
I'm just chewing on that a little bit.
I know you look very serious.
Yeah. No, it's one of those things where it doesn't take much to immerse you in an environment like that. And there's some nitpickers that will talk about the difference between immersive video versus a truly virtual reality environment or something along those lines. But, and I was also trying to recall, I feel like I saw some studies that said where if you are increasing the motion and movement of people, that actually decreases the nausea factor because it's more of a connect to your brain as far as the motion goes, like when you're getting shaken and moved around. But I was unable to bring that up, so I can't prove that one way or the other.
Well, usually the way people describe it is that the reason that vertigo is caused in VR is that your brain perceives you as moving, but your stomach feels yourself stationary. And so it's that brain stomach being offset that's what often usually the stomach hurts first. They'll like tense up a little bit, and then they'll kind of feel warmer and kind of a little lightheaded. And what we always say to people is, listen, if you're feeling at all lightheaded or whatever, just take your headset off. You'll be back in the real world, chill out for half a minute or a minute, see how you feel then, and then jump back in. So it's interesting that some people can do that and, go back in quickly. And then there's definitely others who maybe they went too far. Like they kind of tried to push it and say like, oh, I'm okay, until the point where they really don't feel well. And then they take it off and then they need to be out for half an hour or an hour. So that's, it's a very individualistic experience. Like people react totally differently to it. So it's hard to tell.
Yeah, and I think that was the core of the study of the group that they were looking at was trying to remove as much of that disconnect as possible. I'm curious for brands that are looking to use this as branding, marketing, right, as a way of promoting their own personal brand. What would you say to a group that's wanting to use VR as that kind of brand promotion, as that marketing promotion? You mentioned a couple of things that we'd seen kind of at South by and things like that. Do you have any advice for a company that's looking to get into this space as part of their branding and marketing?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that this is experiential marketing, like VR branded events, AR as well. I think it can be in the same conversation, is one of the most exciting and kind of coolest developments that will happen in the next few years. That is happening now and will really take over in the next few years. I think that people are looking for kind of personalized, customized, unique experiences these days. And in many ways, I would say people are kind of bored of the same old events. I'm sure you kind of deal with those conversations a lot of how do you spice things up and make people excited about anything anymore. Like I was saying earlier, we were doing this project where we're going to be doing augmented reality for a big conference poster for a big event. That's something that most of the attendees will have never seen before. So the organizer can say, yeah, like this is going to cost, whatever it is, 15, 25K, but it's absolutely worth it because our attendees will leave saying, wow, that conference, they're really doing some cool things, And so, I wasn't at South by, but hearing about how they did the Ready Player One, they even brought Spielberg and a bunch of the cast. That was a surprise thing. Obviously, that's great. But they had the film premiere, and then they have HTC created concurrent kind of little VR vignettes. So kind of 3 to 5 minute scenes as part of the film, or that came from the film. And the description of them was that they basically were the film come to life. So you could be in the stacks in Wade's room and you kind of just look around. And for any fan, I mean, that's a connection in a way that they've never been able to have before. So I think that brands who are looking to really push the envelope here and break new ground as to how to connect with fans, this is one of the coolest ways out there to do it. The costs may be high, as I said before, but I think that ultimately nowadays, like, it's all about the attention economy, right? How do you get people to care about something? How do you get them to tweet or Instagram or Facebook about it? The answer is by giving them a unique experience that will capture their attention, and then they'll want to show it off to others. And so I think that's where VR and AR really comes in.
We talked about the content being, expensive in order to produce. If someone is wanting to go down this road, who do they talk to about that? Where do we find those content builders? I mean, it sounds like you guys are building some stuff in AR. Is that something that you provide, or maybe you could point people in the right direction? Have any ideas of where they could start to go?
Yeah, usually we work with, it's interesting. As I said before, we're sort of an ecosystem builder. That's how we see ourselves. So we just know a ton of people who are VR and AR creators. We don't do really any of it ourselves, but we work with a lot of people who do. I would say that the easy answer is to look locally. I always suggest that just because it's easier to work with people who are in your city, in your time zone and all that. I would say that the big hubs of kind of VR creators probably are San Fran, LA, Toronto, and Vancouver, obviously. Yeah, so I would actually say it's interesting. It's a lot of places that have a history of film. So Vancouver, Toronto, LA, those places, because basically people who are in the film industry are saying, all right, this is just a new toy to do the same kind of stuff. How do we tell the same stories, just that we can do 360? So I would say, yeah, any city who has a great history of film, like Vancouver, like Toronto, like LA, actually has a lot of good VR companies right now. And then also, yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say a lot of good that are also getting a lot of good investment right now, which is, and that's key to growth, right? Is that because it's this hot new space. And so we're seeing, they've just started, I know here, there's it's called the Cube, but it's an incubator just for VR and AR companies.
Yep.
So that's giving them a lot of, space and access to the computers that they need to give them the speed to build and to have other people to feed off that creative for. And, all of those things are important as we start to move to that next space.
Yeah, so we're part of the CFC, Canadian Film Center's Idea Boost network. I think that there's so much support right now. I think the one thing, and we see so many VR content pieces being shown to us. We meet a ton of VR companies. The one thing that I'm a little down on the industry for is that there are maybe too many people who take ideas who are sort of half-baked, who aren't great ideas, and they spend all their time and effort building something that honestly nobody really wants. Like we saw a 360 VR horse racing experience that was essentially you were like a jockey on the horse, but the idea was that it'd be used at tracks for people who were bored of gambling. But really, most people go to the track to gamble. They were like, oh, it'll attract millennials because millennials like VR. And I basically said, I just don't think this is a good idea. I just don't think people will sit on a horse in virtual reality. But maybe I'll be wrong. I don't know. We'll see.
I feel like you can say that about ideas about any industry.
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
I was thinking we've never heard that in the event industry.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm sure there's a lot of
event being put together on a half-baked idea and not
I just have a list scrolling through my head of where I just nod and smile. Oh yeah, let me think about that. Nod and smile.
Fair enough.
You just have to practice that art, Jonah, of the nod and smile.
Oh, I did. I said, yeah, if you guys make the piece, we'll host it. We can have a launch party, all that kind of stuff. We haven't heard from them in a while, so I'm not
yeah. You're like, that's an awesome idea, sort of. I think there's also some really interesting ones around human safety. I remember a few examples last year from South by Southwest. There's a lot of things like don't drink and drive, and here's why, of actually doing VR experiences in cars and those kinds of things. There's just so many applications, and
we did one with I think it was Barrick Gold, a big mining company, and they created a really great experience. I was thoroughly impressed. They must have spent a huge amount. It was very, very well made, but it was really cool. It essentially was like a mining training simulator, I guess. So they had people do different jobs in a mine, including being underground and driving a truck and all sorts of things. And they said that training accidents is the fourth largest waste of money that they have. It's they spend hundreds of millions of dollars a year because somebody accidentally drove a truck the wrong way and bumped it into something, and that piece of equipment was $1 million piece of equipment. So they said actually it's a huge problem that they have to deal with. And then the other one was the RAF, it was created in the UK. The Royal Air Force, I think, made it. But it was essentially a helicopter training simulator. And they showed that, I forget the exact numbers, but it was whatever the average length of time that you have to take to get certified to be a helicopter pilot. So let's say 100 hours. They could put people in VR and do it in 1/10 of the time and produce fairly similar results. So something like 10 hours in VR versus 100 hours in real life of training simulation got people to 75% passing versus I think it was 84%. So really not much of a difference, and huge time savings, also way less risk because you're just in a VR simulator versus an actual helicopter. So I think things like that, I think training for brands is really cool. And I think, again, like we were saying, there's so many opportunities for growth with this technology. It's really just about what people can dream up and what people can create.
I think I love that you've created sort of this event space around it. But I think you're right. I mean, it's, sort of how, we've been hearing about it is that obviously money comes from enterprise who's building something that's for training. That I think, and I think somewhere where some of the disconnect is coming with VR as being a cool thing is that when somebody builds a training simulation, and not like helicopter training, but, for example, I know there's a lot of training that's being done for, dental hygienists and assistants in OR rooms, and, it's things that are very, again, where you can really decrease that learning curve and also increase vastly the success in an operating room situation, or those kinds of, intense situations for success. But the challenge is the graphics are so less than the entertainment graphics, so that so you go through a training experience and you think VR, meh, it's okay, whereas when you go through something that's a truly a custom created immersive entertainment experience, then you're like, okay, now I get VR. So I think that, and where we're starting to see, again, it is a really, really active space in Vancouver, so we see a lot of groups working on it, but it's that there's literally right now currently not enough people who have the skills to build, the sort of game quality graphics for all of these other applications that are these growth companies. So it's, when my son said, Mom, I don't really want to go to university, I really just want to go and do 3D animation, I was like, go. So you've got a job for a long time.
Yeah, exactly. No, I agree with you. I think that in a lot of those, we get a lot of that stuff all the time, and you're just like, the graphics are just terrible. Like we can't show this to the general public. Cool concept, but we can't show it to the general public. Yeah, I think that will take time to get to that level. It's really just where people want to invest their time and effort in. I think that, again, like I said before, the first vertical that was really successful was gaming for VR. What are an entertainment, and so what are going to be the next verticals that really succeed? I think the enterprise kind of training is one that people are starting to wake up to, of saying this is actually a huge market. So with that market potential comes companies and studios who are willing to invest time and effort into building that stuff.
So now we're looking for those companies and studios. So now I want to, buy something. So I'm your typical client who doesn't know anything about VR. It's just like, I just want it to be cool. So what are some of the things that I need to think about to ask to know if who I'm dealing with really is the expert that they say that they are?
Yeah, great question. I would say that the way we approach the process of potentially working on a custom VR or AR project is really all about deeply trying to understand what their needs are. I think often people have this idea of, I want VR. Just VR is cool. I want to put it in an event. And often they'll say, we want a custom VR piece. And I always say to them, like, okay, well, before we get to that point, what is your goal of having the VR? Is it just to entertain people? Is it a core part of the event? Is it not even really needed? Because that is often the answer that I say of, you know what, it sounds like you have a great event otherwise, and putting VR in will just complicate things, and maybe you shouldn't even do that. So maybe that's bad for my bottom line, but we often say that to people, of saying it doesn't actually make sense. So I think understanding your own needs as the client, or for the studio or creator to understand the client needs, is so critical, because that really is the basis of a good working relationship. The next thing I would highly suggest is trying to find someone who's built something that's fairly similar. There's so much content being created in VR right now, and it's very vastly different. So, for example, we do a lot of work with tourism boards. So I think next week or a couple weeks from now, the New Hampshire tourism board's coming in. We've done California, Texas. So basically the tourism board is showing 360 videos to a bunch of kind of influencers and media to say, hey, this is what New Hampshire or Texas or California looks like. You can put on the headset and experience it. Now write about it, or come check it out, or tell more people about it, basically. So an interesting tactic for these tourism authorities, and we've hosted quite a few of them now. And one of the times they said to us, okay, we don't have anything. Can you make this for us? And I said, okay, if we made it, we'd have to fly a whole team out and do this and do that. I think we could do it, but the budget will be quite a bit. I would suggest probably looking up a local creator. They then kind of came back and said, okay, well, here's 3 we found. Can you vet them? And I said, okay, interesting. So that was actually a cool relationship where we basically got kind of paid a consultant fee to vet these local creators. And one of them was like, head above the rest. It was not even close. They were very, very professional. And so kind of suggested them, and they went with them. They created the pieces, ended up being really great, and kind of went from there. So I think a lot of it, especially in a new industry, it's about finding partners you can trust, who have really similar experience. If it's, if they've done really cute animated videos, having them do a 360, tourism video doesn't really make sense, right? Like I think people want certain studios to kind of be the be all and end all solution. And you have to be critical and be careful right now because, again, there's so many people in the space. But yeah, that would be my approach.
Thanks.
I want to take things down the road a little bit and say, okay, I mean, you think about how far we've come in just now. Okay, the idea of VR has been around for a while, and it wasn't very good for a long time. I would say the modern era of VR has really only been within the last year or so. But how far we've come in just that year or so has been pretty incredible. What do you see coming down the way in kind of the next year as we move through 2018? And then, even further out from that, as you start to hone and mold your experiences there, what are you guys looking to, 12 months to 2 years down the road?
Yeah, so I get this question a lot. The people want the crystal ball. People want the answer.
Of course we do. Give it now. I don't know.
I don't think there's going to be like a Bitcoin VR thing. That's the question people always say. Is there going to be crypto VR meetup? I don't know. No, I think that the first thing to kind of caution against is that while things have definitely moved quickly, I would say that the Oculus SDK and the Vive kind of came out late 2015, early 2016. So realistically, it's not been more than 2 years, which is crazy to think that there's been that much of a development in just 2 years. So in some ways, I want to caution against people thinking like, oh, in 2 more years, we're all going to be living in headsets. But I think that, so I don't think it's going to go as fast as some people want. I do think that there will be technological advancements that kind of shock a lot of us. So the ones that I sort of foresee coming, the first one in the very near future is the price of headsets is definitely going to come down. So it will be more affordable for people to get in their own kind of house or whatever. At the same time, I think that the industry is actually going to subdivide even more so that right now, I would say there's a clear leader, which is like the HTC Vive. Oculus Rift is good, but Facebook bought it and is sort of seemingly on the way to killing it. So the HTC Vive is the leader, the highest quality processing power. Anyone is using that. As more and more systems come out, I think that it will subdivide it so that content creators may not build things for all platforms. And that's actually a bit of a concern that there will be exclusivity on certain platforms and not on others. But the next step, I would say this is by, let's call it 2020, just because that's a nice round number, is that in terms of out-of-home VR experiences, is the popularity of free roam VR. So the idea that you can put a headset and have a gun in your hand or whatever it is, and have a backpack and actually be able to walk around a large space. So usually it's like a kind of warehouse space, 60 feet by 30 feet, something like that. And that you can play with your friends, with your coworkers, with multiple people in a single space. The technology is mostly there, but it's very cool and not 100% there yet, but very cool what's been done so far. So that's, I would say, a definite excitement. I think beyond that, the real question will become, does VR become social? Will people sit in their own homes or in a private space where they're not around another physical human and put on a headset and then interact with other people? And that's the real question. If people do that, then the world of Ready Player One will definitely happen. We'll all go to school. Why would we all travel places to go to school when we can all just put a headset on and then all our kids can learn like that? I think that the way we see kids adopting VR right now is it's incredibly quick. When we do our kind of intro demo, often we'll do it for a parent and a kid. And the parent will say, we'll do the whole thing. And the parent will say like, okay, I think I got it. All right, I'm going to put my headset on. And the kid's already in like shooting zombies, like they're really, really quick with it. If you were born into a world in which it's totally normal, you will develop with it. And so it's exciting, also a little bit scary to think that kids who are born now, who will likely live into, past the year 2100, that they will experience a world in which they could foreseeably live a good chunk of their time with a headset on. And so that raises all sorts of questions of, in terms of social dynamics, how people interact with each other, our digital versus our virtual, our real selves. And I think that those questions are really important questions to ask, because that stuff is coming sooner rather than later. I think that when people see that as an issue for 50 years from now, I actually think that those questions are coming earlier. And that's where I see a lot of apprehension of people saying like, oh, I don't want to try VR because I'm worried it's going to take over my life and I'm going to live as a robot, in a machine kind of thing. My answer is, don't worry, that's still quite a while away. And you should, experience the technology, because it feels, the way I like to describe VR is that it feels like it's the early days of the internet. Like, people have built something really cool, but they don't really know how best to use it. And that's where I see things going in the next few years, that the tech will get better, the content will get much, much better as people really spend time to build for it. And it's my sincere hope that we don't use it frivolously, that we don't waste our time on just the entertainment side of things. Entertainment's fun and useful and is important for society, but I also think we can do a lot of good with it. So the empathy stuff, the, walking a mile in someone's shoes aspect of VR, I think is totally critical. And I think it won't actually succeed unless we do stuff like that. I really think if it's just an entertainment medium, it'll die out like every entertainment medium eventually does when something else that's more interesting surpasses it. So,
like Blu-ray.
Yeah.
And to be fair, they said the same thing about books, right? That we were going to stop talking to each other and never leave our houses because with books. And it turned out to be exactly what we're talking about with VR. The first step toward empathy, being able to hear about other cultures and hear about other worlds, and use our imagination in new ways.
So where are those greatest opportunities then? As for our event professionals out there, where are going to be the places, obviously coming to, people like you in rooms like yours is awesome if you're in Toronto, and obviously a must do. So, but what are going to be the other, if they could only pick one or two things where they could incorporate it, what would you suggest?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think that the best thing to do for event professionals right now is, one, to just try and learn about as much as possible of what's going on in the VR space right now. Again, there's so many things happening. There's just such exciting developments. So, following Upload VR or Road to VR, any of the kind of VR news sites, I would say, checking them out once in a while is important. Interestingly, I think that a lot of the film festivals have really leaned into the immersive media stuff. So checking out, I'll be at Tribeca this year. Basically, the top 10 VR pieces in the world right now, all were at Tribeca last year. So definitely worth checking out. Sundance is also a big proponent. I think they call it the immersive zone or whatever it is. But Sundance is also doing some cool things. South by Southwest obviously has had some big announcements. So checking things like that out will be a great way to expose yourself to what people are building. And then in terms of bringing VR to your own event, I think what's really, really important is understanding the user experience. So how will somebody who attends your event, how will they actually get to enjoy VR? Often, we get asked to come to do events where there's 250 people and they say, we want one headset. And my answer is always, okay, that's great, but then
for one person.
Yeah, we're only going to get 25 people maybe through in the whole time. So then we say, okay, well, we also have a giant kind of 100-inch projector screen. That means anyone who walks by will actually be able to see it. So making it that kind of immersive experience for the player, but also interactive experience for the viewer is so critical. And then kind of the last thing is, in terms of events, I think it's, if you can push the boundaries and you kind of have that desire to step outside the comfort zone of what traditional events are, I think VR is one of the coolest technologies out there right now to use. And it can definitely help enhance any event, whether it's a kind of small cocktail gala event or whether it's a huge conference. The expression I like to say to planners that we often talk to is, don't use VR for VR's sake. Use it because it's cool and it's VR. That's the goal. I just hate when people use technology just because they think that they have to, because they want to be a cool, forward-thinking event. That's not what it's about. And I think what will happen is, going back to the user design experience, I think the users will understand that. They'll sort of walk by it and say, oh, there's another VR demo of some lame thing that I don't care about. I'd rather, walk to the bar because I've had a long day, right? But if you can do a thing which is, one example might be that we've done actually at 2 conferences already is they called it a sort of chill zone or relaxation zone. So in the actual event space, there was a sort of, pipe and draped area that was really relaxing, pillows, the kind of lounge chairs and all that. And then we had the Muse meditation headband and guided VR meditation, just as a way for people to kind of, escape the hustle and bustle for a few minutes. And the response is overwhelmingly positive because it's something unexpected. It's really kind of tech forward. And it's that unique experience that pretty much nobody that we show it to has ever had. So those are the kind of things I'd strongly urge looking into. That's a way to make your event memorable. And that's a way to use VR to its fullest and not just as a kind of gimmick.
Yeah, we're actually going to incorporate that into the idea of this meditation lounge, and as well as we're doing we're working with it's called YVRFF, the Vancouver Virtual Film Festival. And we're putting in just a little, like a curated film zone where, 10 headsets, people can come by in the marketplace and kind of chill out. And you're right, like incorporating it in ways that make sense is really what we need to be doing. So now, besides venues that are going to create their own virtual amazing lounges or their own spaces, what are other opportunities that might, work for venues? So, I mean, we've seen virtual site inspections with VR now. But is there anything that we're missing for venues, ways that they could be using it smarter?
Yeah, so I think that the easiest one to do is like the virtual site inspection. I think you can even do that to like a 360 walking tour. So we have that of our space where we send that to every client. We basically had a 360 production studio come in and film our space, and then everyone can use it on YouTube. So you can actually just kind of pull it around, and very simple, YouTube, Facebook, whatever. So that's actually a great thing to have. And then another thing that I think is for venues it would be great for is basically the idea of a walkthrough, not just of the venue bare, but an actual walkthrough of a previous or similar event. So we've been trying to do that. It's hard to film 360 VR during a live event and have it not be people just kind of staring at it. But, showcasing a cool event of saying like, this is exactly how it'll look like with the lighting, with the bar will be there and whatever. It's so easy for them to see that and say like, great, this is exactly what I want. And so I think there's cost that goes into building that, but it's actually very reasonable to make a 360 VR piece.
And I'm super excited for that coming down the way for us on the back end, being able to use these as sales and promotional materials for venues, for hotels. Like you said, being able to do virtual walkthroughs is such an amazing sales tool, I think, for venues and production companies. Frankly, event companies will be able to use this and really show their clients what it's going to look like, both VR and AR. I think I'm really excited about what's coming down for us, not just the attendees as well. We do have to start wrapping it up. It's that time, unfortunately, where the clock's winding down. I know it's just like that. It happens every time. So we've got our closing questions, Jonah, that we'd like to ask everybody. So starting off, if you could just pick one, what is the one tip that you would have for event planners? Could be about VR, but it could just be a general tip as well.
The one tip would be, I guess I sort of said it before, but I'll reiterate, using VR for VR's sake is not what you want to do. You want to use it because it is a unique add-on to your event.
I think it's okay to use your one tip as a recap. I think that's allowed. I'll have to check. But
perfect.
And
it's also dangerously close to something that I always love to say, which is I would always rather see old technology used well than new technology used just because it's new.
Yeah.
So
it
absolutely.
mean that when it talks about overhead projectors, we have a line.
One of the best presentations I've ever seen was designed for overhead projectors. We actually got to use him. We got him to use a document camera instead. That was like our big thing, but he still brought like the plastic things, and it was actually a really good presentation. So I have to even say it can be done. And then the final question is, Any cool resources you want to share, websites, blogs, books, life hack that's working for you really well right now, anything along those lines, resources you'd like to share with the audience?
Yeah, sure. I guess first thing would be if you're interested, check us out at houseofvr.com. We do lots of events. I think following what we do could give you tips on how to do similar events in your own kind of venues and your own locations. In terms of kind of following VR stuff, generally Upload VR, I think they're upload.io now, but Upload VR, Road to VR, those are pretty big kind of VR news sites, I suppose. And then there are quite a few, I don't know where exactly to find it, but if you just kind of search for VR conferences, VR expos, Vancouver has a pretty big one. Toronto has a very large one, but there's lots all around the world. The AWE, the Augmented World Expo, very close to Tom Emmerich, who runs that. So there's a lot of really cool things. And that's what I would kind of suggest doing, of just going to check some of them out. I think that you can go to some of these events and really get a quick lay of the land of just understanding where VR is at and how it can apply to your business. I think everyone has a different business that, a different event, whether it's an event planner, an event venue, whatever it is, that you could quickly understand, where this new technology can fit into your business. So the future's exciting. Lots of cool stuff is happening, and trying to keep up to date is probably my hardest job.
Well, and you raised something that we'll have to save for another episode, but the idea of actual virtual conferences and trade shows, like full on, where the attendee stays home and visits. We'll have to save that one for another episode. Well, Jonah Brotman, thank you so much for joining us today on EventIcons. House of VR,
awesome.
House of VR in Toronto. Where can folks find out more about you and what you're up to?
houseofvr.com. Check us out on probably Instagram. Our Instagram is pretty awesome. So check us out on Instagram, House of VR _House of VR. And looking forward to showing people the virtual world.
Very nice. Thanks for joining us. Tahira and Endean, thank you so much for joining me.
As always, Brandt.
Where can people find out more about what you're up to? I know things are starting to get busy for you.
It's a bit crazy. So bctechsummit.ca, it's going to be the place to be. We've already got a couple thousand people registered, and it's, oh my God, there's so much going on from a virtual perspective. I was so excited it just makes my head reel today thinking about talking with Jonah.
I am so jealous. I'm going to have to come out there and see the end result one of these days.
Come on out.
Because you talk about all the wonderful things you guys are doing at BC Tech Summit, and it makes me extremely jealous.
I've got a podcast theater just with your name on it.
Now we're talking.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, everybody, for joining us. We want to remind you that EventIcons is recorded live each Wednesday at 5 p.m. Eastern Time. You can watch behind the scenes on Facebook Live. Hello, Facebook Live. We enjoy having your comments there live as well. The episodes are released the following Tuesday on iTunes, Pocket Cast, Stitcher, or wherever your favorite podcast app is. But the best way to join us is event-icons.com. There you can sign up for the newsletter. You'll see all of the posted episodes along with the show notes, all of the resources we just shared. That really is the best way. And then you can get hooked into the Zoom chat and join us live and send us those questions directly. Lots of people were tuned in today. We're happy to see them. Just listen to those, as Will likes to put it, knowledge bombs being dropped left and right. So thank you so much for joining us live. We want to know what you think. Use that hashtag EventIcons to tell us what you think about the show on Twitter. What kind of virtual reality experiences are you seeing out there? Has this opened your mind a little bit to the possibility of group experiences in virtual reality? Join us there. Join the Facebook group as well and let us know what you think. Let us know what icons you want to see on the show. Thank you so much for joining us, and we'll see you next time on EventIcons.
Thank you for joining us for another amazing episode of #EventIcons. To catch the transcription and all of the resources mentioned, head to www.helloendless.com/blog. This week's episode will be posted and available by next Tuesday. Also, let us know what you thought about this week's episode. Share your biggest takeaway and join the social conversation. Sponsored by Little Bird Told Media. Just tag your post with #EventIcons. We'd love to hear from you. Thank you again for joining us. We'll see you next Wednesday at 5 p.m. Eastern, right here on #EventIcons.
right, turning everything off. Stop the recording.